Well, hello and welcome to VLGA Connect in conversation today with David Morris. And before I get to David, Kathryn Arndt has joined us. Kathryn is the CEO, of course, of the VLGA. Hi, Kathryn.
Hi, Chris. Hello, David. Nice to have you on the program today.
Hi to both of you. Good to be here.
David, thank you for joining us. As the shadow spokesperson for local government in Victoria, we're really keen to get your sense of how things are around the sector, your observations and your approach to the role. This is not the first time you've had this portfolio, am I right?
No, Chris, it's not. I think one way and another, so I'm probably close to 9 years out of my 14.5 years in the Parliament. I've had some association with the portfolio. I was a councillor back in the dark ages, but pre-amalgamation, and I went into Parliament at the end of 2006, and at the end of early 2008, the Liberals and the Nationals went back into coalition, which was an opportunity for Ted, the leader at that stage, to sort of refresh the front and the middle bench. And at that point, he asked me to be Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for local government. So I did that basically for 3 years. And then I was actually the Parliamentary Secretary for local government for 4 years, 2010 to 2014. And then about September 2017, Matthew Guy, I was Shadow Minister for Finance for all of the last Parliament. And towards the end of 2017, Matthew asked me to pick up local government again. And then I thought I'd escaped when we had the election. I went into the environment portfolio, but I've sort of had I've had a range of responsibilities in this Parliament, but I'm delighted to be back in the local government portfolio, along with housing and ageing.
David, what have you seen change, I guess, over the years from your time as a mayor and councillor, and then those early sort of years you described then in the shadow parliamentary secretary role? What's changed in the sector from your observations?
Oh, look, it's been an interesting evolution, Kathryn. I think early on, because a lot of the players hadn't changed, while the rules had changed, the sort of the structure had changed. We'd gone through amalgamations. We'd gone from 210 to 78 and then 79 councils, but a lot of the councillors hadn't changed, particularly in regional Victoria, but around Melbourne. Most of the officers hadn't changed. A few new people came in from various backgrounds. So for a while there, it was almost business as usual with the different responsibilities under the Act and so on. But of course, we've now got to the point where we're 25, 27 years on from amalgamation. And we're seeing probably most of the councillors from the pre-amalgamation era now gone. If they're not, they're getting pretty damn old, because unless you're about 6 like I was when I got elected. But yeah, we're seeing, we now have, I think, a very different local government. And I haven't really thought this through. I'm just sort of speaking off the top of my head, but it's sort of the old ways persisted, the old culture persisted, and then has gradually evolved. So I think we've now, we've got a different breed of councillors. We've got a lot of particularly CEOs, but senior officers coming in that have not, started at the council at 16 and worked their way through. I hesitate to say it's a more vibrant or dynamic environment, because I think the old one was pretty good, but it was, it was a far more structured environment. There's probably one other thing that I'd add that became more evident to me immediately, and I think it's grown, and that is the vast difference in the relationship between councils and particularly the state government. And senior council officers and state public servants. In my day, in the old Mornington Shire, we had next to no involvement with the public service. Yes, we try and talk to ministers, but there wasn't a one-to-one relationship between public servants and council officers. And I think that's, the closest we got to it. I remember the regional manager from Vic Roads came down and met with the council, and that was sort of probably every 3 years we'd have those sorts of meetings. Whereas I think now there's a far greater integration. There's certainly, I think, more migration between the two, so there's that understanding. But because the councils are that much bigger and there's so many fewer of them to deal with, it's much easier to have direct links, and that's changed the nature of the beast. At one stage in my time, it was pretty much politician to politician, and then the professionals were expected to go back and implement the policy decisions that we made. Whereas now, depending on the area, but I think there's a lot more interaction.
It's probably understandable when you think about the number of services that local government deliver to their communities. I think it's over 140. And of course, many of those services are delivered on behalf of state and also federal government. So, the myriad of legislation and policies across a number of state departments and even federal departments really need to be digested by the local government sector. And I guess just on that point, David, you've had an opportunity now, I understand, to talk to a few councillors and councils since you've been back in the portfolio. We've got a new Local Government Act. Well, it's not so new anymore. It came in last year. And also we had local government elections in October last year. What are some of the observations, or what are you hearing from the sector?
Well, I should say, to start with, I haven't been able to meet with as many councils as I would like to have, in part because I'm not keen to do it via Zoom or via Teams. I think I get a much better feel for people, frankly, but for sort of the circumstances and the environment of a council by actually going out and sitting down in the municipality. So, I've talked to a few councils. I've been up in the northeast. I've been over to see West Wimmera. We've done a little bit around the Geelong region, not Geelong itself, but Golden Plains and Colac Otway at this stage. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping, and I've talked to a lot more on the phone or via Zoom, but the intention in the next 6 months, COVID permitting, is to actually get around and sit down with every council or the mayor and CEO, whatever arrangements suit them. So I hope to have a whole lot more feedback than I have at the moment. But I think in terms of the Act itself, most people seem relatively happy with it. I've seen a little bit of concern about the consultative process and sort of the particularly into the council plan and the need to, some councils have said to me, look, this is fantastic. We were trying to consult the best we can, but now we've got a framework, and yes, it costs us money, but it's money really well spent. And others are saying, that's our job. We're elected members. We're here to represent the community. We can talk to the community. Why should we spend $50,000 or $60,000 or $70,000 of ratepayers' money for a process no one's ever used before? So I think, no pun intended, the jury is very much out on that small part of the Act. But I think generally it's working pretty well. I've got to say, though, I have a concern with the legislation, and it's more of a parliamentarian's concern than the sector concern. But we're seeing, not just in the Local Government Act, but in many pieces of legislation. There's one before the Parliament at the moment with regard to social services. But we're seeing a real trend where what was previously in regulation is often moved down to guidance, and a lot of what was previously in an act is being said, oh no, we'll do that in regulation. And so the act, you know, all the buzzwords, it's a principles-based act, and you know, it's a broad framework and all the yeah. But that does, you know, from my perspective, it gives the regulation making process a lot of power. And yes, I know you can disallow regulations, but it's not the same as actually being able to amend legislation. You know, you can either disallow regulation or not. You can't really go through and say, well, you know, page 27, line 12, omit, because we're not happy with it. You don't get to disallow regulations. Like, not that the Legislative Assembly ever deals with regulations, but the council certainly has the capacity to do it.
You and I have spoken about this before, and the concerns, I guess, that you're articulating there from your perspective is, I guess, the lack of opportunity potentially for the Parliament to scrutinise the legislation in ways it may have done so in the past. Although I think the move to the principles-based approach is something that's happening across, well, is probably not just limited to Victoria.
Oh, absolutely. The only, you know, we don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but just on that point, the principles-based approach is great when it's working, but you know, so you know, what were formerly regulations often get down to guidance, and that's completely in the hands of either the minister or local government Victoria, in the case of local government, and completely below the radar as far as parliaments are concerned. And you know, that's when it can get into difficulties. I mean, we don't want to tie people up in detail. We're not saying we need to, you know, dot every I and cross every T and just really nail everything down. But it's just about how the principles in the Act interact with how it plays out on the ground. And we'll just have to wait and see.
Look, and I think the peak bodies have a role in assisting with that also. And that's why we really value, from the VLGA's perspective, the opportunity to engage with stakeholders like yourself, and also, you know, the local government Victoria.
So, David, you made the point that, you know, there's a different relationship between people who work in councils these days and the public service more broadly. And it's not lost on me that, you know, we've lost a few CEOs from the local government sector recently, news of another one this week, going into roles with the state government. So two issues there. One, there's closer relationships, I think, because a lot of local government people are choosing to go into those state public service roles. But I guess the broader thing there is the loss of CEOs around the state with experience and a lot of knowledge, which is a double-edged sword, of course. It creates opportunities for new CEOs coming through, but it also means we've got, that loss of experience. Is that something that you've turned your mind to, and should it be a concern?
Well, it's something I've certainly had conversations with LG Pro about. I think it's probably, the issue is probably heightened because, as I mentioned earlier, we've now got to that point where pretty much anyone who was involved in local government pre-amalgamation is gone. You know, I can think of 2 or 3 friends of mine, people who've remained friends, who've retired in the last couple of years. So you are, to some extent, losing that organisational or institutional memory. And I'm not sure that, and this may be a sweeping statement, but I'm not sure we're as good at retaining institutional memory now as we were, say, 20, 25 years ago. So the personnel then become even more important. And also, I think, and I don't have any thoughts about how you fix this, but I think that the injection of talent from outside the sector has been very useful, and we've some really good people come into local government that may not have gone near it if it had been as structured as it used to be. You also more and more have sometimes CEOs, sometimes senior officers who come into local government and don't get the role of the council.
Yeah.
And, sort of feel that they're there simply to be a rubber stamp and to be corralled, and, you'll talk about what we want you to talk about and so on. And I think that's a danger. That's a danger both for councillors and for the organisation. So I think we do need to keep an eye on that, because if we get to a point where the councillors are effectively considered to be rubber stamps, then the sector's in danger. I think that's the point where the organisation starts working to its own priorities rather than the priorities of its community, and that's a dangerous point, I think.
The other thing I wanted to get your thoughts on is we seem to be hearing more and more about cultural issues, particularly amongst councillors, but not just that, often between the elected reps and the organisations. And the current minister, Sean Lean, has been pretty clear that he's found what he's heard to be unacceptable and is conducting a review of the culture in the very near future. Do you welcome that? Do you have any thoughts on the need for that sort of process to happen?
I certainly have no problem with it. That's my starting point. I mean, I haven't been in the room, so to speak, for a very long time, and some of the reports that you hear of the behaviour, 99% of councillors are absolutely responsible, doing the right thing and behaving themselves. There's always been one or two that don't. The council I was part of had a councillor that thought it'd be fun to burn down the senior bylaws officer's back fence and finish up getting charged with arson. I'm not saying it's never happened in anywhere close to me, but yes, basically some of the bullying that you're hearing about now is completely unacceptable, and it's unacceptable in any organisation. That sort of behaviour I have no personal experience of, but as I made the point when I spoke to VLGA a while back, the conference, I'm not a woman, so I'm not going to see things through the eyes of a woman. And what I might see as being perhaps edgy but acceptable, I'm not in their shoes. I said it far more eloquently at the conference. I was quoting Eric Holder, who was Barack Obama's Attorney General, and he was talking about his experience as a black man. But I think the same applies. I mean, that behaviour is just completely unacceptable. What I think we've got to be very careful of, though, is that we don't allow, and everyone's got to be vigilant on this, that we don't allow whatever actions we take to provide a necessary remedy to be then taken up as a political tool. We don't want to fall in the trap of, oh, you're bullying me, being pulled out because that person is your political opponent. And so I guess where I'm really heading with that is I think we've all got to be very careful about the level of debate and the way we debate issues. Because robust debate, whether it's in the council chamber or in the Legislative Assembly chamber, is an absolutely critical part of democracy. But you've got to be able to respect one another when you're doing it, and when you walk outside, you've got to be able to talk to one another.
Just on that point, and this is probably not a bad sort of conversation point to wrap up on, is, you know, we're about to enter into the mayoral election processes shortly, yet again, and I guess you know, as a former mayor and councillor yourself, what would you say to your, you know, the councillors out there about, you know, what makes a good mayor? What's the role of the mayor about, and what are some of the skills and attributes you think that person should bring to the role?
Well, I think you can probably make a distinction between the public-facing aspects of the role. You know, the ability to be a community leader, to interact with the community, to represent the council at public functions and that sort of thing, and represent the council and effectively argue the council's case with ministers and so on. But I think the more critical element is the ability to run a meeting fairly, to run a meeting in an inclusive way, and make sure, coming back to that point I was making about debate, you know, not every debate is going to be absolutely life and death, but you need someone that when it does get to, you know, when it does get to be serious, that everyone can walk out of the room feeling that they've at least had the opportunity to have their say and they've been dealt with fairly. And if you can do that, then you've got a real chance of making any council work. But if people feel they're being victimised, if people feel they're being overlooked, that's when the tension starts.
We might wrap it up there. Wise words. Thank you, David. Really appreciate spending some time with you and getting your thoughts on the state of the sector. And I'm sure the sector looks forward to engaging with you more frequently and more openly when conditions allow in the hopefully not too distant future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, thank you for asking me, Chris. It's been a pleasure to be here. Kathryn, good to talk to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you. We've been speaking with David Morris, the Shadow Minister for Local Government in Victoria, the member for Mornington, of course, on a special edition of VLGA Connect. Thanks for your company, and we'll see you again soon.